I always believed that Lauren and I were the perfect couple. From the moment we met, there was a connection, an undeniable chemistry that made me feel like I had found my soulmate. I remember the early days of our relationship, the effortless conversations that lasted for hours, the way we could laugh about the simplest things, and how we just seemed to click. We moved through life as if we were two halves of the same whole, complementing each other in ways that felt almost magical. She had a way of understanding me without words, like she could read my thoughts before I even spoke them. I thought that was rare, something most people spend their whole lives searching for, and I had found it in her. We built a life together that was, to the outside world, enviable. We had two beautiful children who were the light of our lives. Every morning was filled with the laughter of our kids running down the hallway, eager for breakfast or the next adventure. Our home was full of warmth, the kind you feel deep inside, where everything just seems right. It wasn't just about material comfort, though we were fortunate enough to be stable financially. It was about the feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with the people I was supposed to be with. Lauren and I shared responsibilities, dreams, and hopes. We both worked hard, balancing our careers with the demands of parenthood, but we never let it drive a wedge between us. It felt like it only brought us closer. We were a team, and even on those tough days, we knew we could rely on each other. There was this unspoken understanding that we were in it together, no matter what life threw at us. I cherished those moments when we would stay up late after the kids went to bed, just talking about everything and nothing, planning our future, dreaming about the vacations we would take, and the milestones we would witness in our children's lives. Our friends often commented on how perfect we seemed together. They would tell us how lucky we were to have found each other, and how they wished they had what we had. I remember feeling a quiet pride whenever someone said that, because, deep down, I believed it too. I believed we had something special, something that could weather any storm. The way Lauren and I could communicate with just a glance, the way we knew each other's needs without having to spell them out, it felt like we had an unbreakable bond. Our love wasn't flashy or over the top, but it was solid. It was built on years of trust, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to the life we were creating together. We had our routines, our little rituals that made life sweet. Sunday mornings were sacred. I'd make pancakes while the kids helped mix the batter, and Lauren would sit at the kitchen counter, smiling at us as she sipped her coffee. Even in those quiet, simple moments, I felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. I would often think to myself, this is it. This is happiness. I never imagined that anything could disrupt what we had. To me, we were invincible. Sure, we had our occasional arguments like any couple, but they were always minor, and always resolved quickly. It was never anything that made me question the foundation of our relationship. I trusted Lauren completely. She was my partner, the mother of my children, the woman I had vowed to spend the rest of my life with. In my mind, there was no greater certainty than the love we shared. We had built a life that was beautiful in its simplicity, anchored by our shared history and the future we were planning together. Looking back, those were the days when I felt the most secure, the most content. I took comfort in the routine, in the knowledge that when I came home after a long day, Lauren would be there. And everything would be as it should be. The kids would be playing in the living room, and the smell of dinner would fill the house. It was the kind of life I had always dreamed of having, a stable, loving family, a happy marriage, and the promise of growing old with someone who knew me better than I knew myself. Little did I know that behind the perfect image, the cracks were already forming. But in those early days, I couldn't see it. I was blissfully unaware, caught up in the illusion that we were untouchable. That our love was stronger than anything that could come our way. And maybe that's what makes it all the more painful now, knowing how perfect everything seemed, how perfect I thought it was. Over time, something changed. At first, it was subtle, small things that I tried to dismiss as nothing more than the natural ebb and flow of a relationship. But soon, those small things began to pile up, turning into nagging doubts that I couldn't shake. Lauren started to grow distant, like she was pulling away from me. But I couldn't understand why. It wasn't like we had fought or had any significant problems that would drive a wedge between us. Yet, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. She started staying late at work more often than usual. At first, I didn't think much of it. Lauren was always committed to her job, and I understood that sometimes she needed to put in extra hours. But then it became a regular thing. What used to be an occasional late night turned into multiple nights a week, with vague explanations about last-minute meetings or deadlines that needed her attention. I wanted to trust her, so I told myself it was just a busy time at work, nothing more. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. Another thing I couldn't help but notice was how glued she became to her phone. Before, she would leave it lying around the house without a second thought, but now it was always with her, like an extension of her hand. She would check it constantly, even during dinner or while we were watching TV. When it buzzed, she'd glance at the screen, sometimes smile or quickly type a response, and then put it away as if nothing had happened. When I asked who was texting her, she'd say it was just friends or something work-related, but the way she brushed off my questions made me uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt like she was hiding something. It was around this time that I noticed the way she looked at Tom, our neighbor. Tom lived just across the street, and while we had always been friendly with him, he was never someone I paid much attention to. He was the kind of guy who drove a sleek car, always had the latest gadgets, and seemed to live a life of ease. Lauren and I used to joke about him being a bit flashy, but suddenly, her jokes had stopped, and her attention toward him seemed different. When we would be outside with the kids, or when we had small gatherings with the neighbors, I began to catch glimpses of her watching him. It wasn't overt, not something anyone else would notice, but to me, it stood out. She looked at him with a subtle curiosity, maybe even admiration. And it bothered me in a way I hadn't expected. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. I didn't want to be one of those husbands who grew paranoid over nothing. I didn't want to believe that Lauren could ever be interested in someone like Tom, or in anyone other than me, for that matter. But as the days went by, the looks lingered a little longer, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. My mind began racing, filling in the gaps with scenarios I didn't want to entertain. I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself it was just my imagination, and that nothing was going on. After all, I trusted Lauren, or at least, I wanted to. But then there were the excuses. When I asked her why she was suddenly spending so much time at work, she'd give me quick, almost rehearsed answers. It's just a busy season, or, my boss needs me to stay on top of this project. Her words were plausible, but the way she said them, with a forced casualness, made me wonder. I started to notice how she avoided eye contact when she gave me those explanations, and how she would quickly change the subject as if to steer me away from probing further. The moments of distance between us became more frequent. When we used to talk about everything, our days, our plans, even our little frustrations, now those conversations felt shallow, as if she was only half listening. Sometimes, when I asked her something, she would respond absent-mindedly, her mind somewhere else. Our late-night talks, once a cherished part of our routine, had dwindled into silence. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had changed between us, trying to pinpoint when it all started to feel different. She still smiled at me and still played her role as a loving wife and mother, but something was off. It was like she was physically present but emotionally distant, a shell of the woman I had once known. It didn't help that Tom was always around. He seemed to have more reasons to stop by, offering to help with a project around the house, or casually dropping by with some excuse to chat. I didn't want to believe that anything was going on between them, but every time I saw the way Lauren interacted with him, it stirred a feeling in my gut that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't anything blatant, nothing you could point to and say, "Look, something is happening here." But there was a familiarity in their exchanges that felt out of place, a warmth in her smile when she talked to him that didn't feel right. My mind was in turmoil. I went back and forth between convincing myself I was overreacting and fearing that my worst suspicions were true. I would catch myself watching Lauren more closely, scrutinizing her every move, wondering if I was reading too much into her actions. I hated feeling this way, but I couldn't stop. It was like a dark cloud had settled over our home, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the feeling of something being wrong wouldn't go away. I didn't want to confront her, not yet. I was afraid of what I might discover, afraid that if I asked her directly, she would confirm my worst fears. Instead, I held on to the hope that this was all just a phase, that maybe she was stressed from work or going through something I didn't fully understand. But deep down, a voice kept whispering that something was wrong, and it was getting harder to ignore. One evening, Lauren told me she was going out with her friends. It wasn't unusual, she had done this before, and I never thought much of it. But by this point, the doubts that had been gnawing at me for months were too strong to ignore. Every time she left the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and my mind would spiral, imagining what she was doing and who she was with. That night, as she got ready to leave, something in me snapped. I could no longer sit idly by, questioning every word she said, every action she took. I needed to know the truth, once and for all. She kissed me on the cheek, just like she always did before going out, and said, "I won't be late." But this time, her kiss felt hollow, like a practiced routine. I watched her walk out the door and heard the familiar sound of her car pulling out of the driveway, and that was when I made the decision. I grabbed my jacket, got in my car, and followed her. I kept my distance, careful not to be seen, feeling a mixture of adrenaline and dread as I trailed her through the quiet streets of our neighborhood. I told myself that I might be wrong, that maybe she was meeting her friends, and that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew. I think I had known for a while, but I just hadn't wanted to face it. As I followed her, my mind raced through all the little moments that had led to this: the late nights, the secretive texts, the distant look in her eyes, and, of course, Tom. There had been too many coincidences, too many times I'd caught her looking at him with a smile that didn't belong to me. My heart was pounding as I drove, a dull ache in my chest that seemed to grow with every turn she made. I felt like I was on the edge of something irreversible, like the life I had known was slipping away, second by second. She didn't drive toward the center of town, where her friends usually met. Instead, she headed in the opposite direction, toward the part of the neighborhood where Tom lived. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and my breath caught in my throat as I realized where she was going. There was no denying it now. I followed her at a safe distance, my mind swirling with emotions I couldn't fully process: fear, anger, heartbreak. Then, I saw her car slow down and pull into Tom's driveway. I stopped my car a little way down the street, far enough that I wouldn't be seen, but close enough that I could watch. My heart pounded in my ears as I watched her get out of the car. She didn't look around nervously, didn't hesitate. She walked straight to his door like she had been there 100 times before. And then, as if the universe wanted to make sure I couldn't deny it any longer, Tom opened the door. And Lauren stepped inside. The door closed behind her, and that was it. My world, my marriage, everything I had built with her, it all shattered in that moment. I sat there, staring at Tom's front door, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I felt like I was in some kind of dream, or rather a nightmare, where nothing made sense but everything was painfully clear. The weight of it hit me all at once, a crushing realization that the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my heart, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. The doubts, the suspicions, the sleepless nights wondering if I was losing my mind, they were all justified. She had been lying to me, right to my face. The pain was like a physical blow, sharp and deep. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to demand an explanation. My mind flooded with images of them together, of the moments they had stolen while I was none the wiser. I imagined every touch, every glance, every whispered word between them. It was like a sickness taking over me, poisoning my thoughts, and making it hard to breathe. But despite the storm raging inside me, I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't storm up to the house, I didn't pound on the door. I knew that would only give them what they expected: an angry, heartbroken husband, losing control in a fit of jealousy. Instead, I sat there in my car, staring at the house, my mind coldly calculating my next move. The pain was still there, burning inside me, but I pushed it down. I had always prided myself on being rational, on keeping a level head, and I wasn't going to let this be any different. This wasn't the time for a confrontation. It was the time for something far more decisive, far more permanent. At that moment, I knew I had to act carefully. Lauren had already made her choice, whether she admitted it or not. She had chosen Tom, chosen to betray the life we had built, and I wasn't going to let her walk away from that without consequences. I had 2 children to think about. I had my dignity to protect. So, instead of barging into Tom's house and demanding answers that I already knew, I began to plot. I realized that I didn't need a scene of confrontation. What I needed was a way to take control of the situation, to reclaim my life in a way that left Lauren with no power, no choice but to face the consequences of what she had done. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching the house, imagining the conversation they were having. The lies she was undoubtedly telling him, just like she had told me. And with every minute that passed, my resolve hardened. I wouldn't let this destroy me. I wouldn't let her have the satisfaction of watching me crumble. I would make sure that when she finally realized what she had lost, it would be too late for her to ever get it back. Eventually, I started the car and drove away, my mind already working through the details of the plan that was forming. The pain was still there, an ever-present weight in my chest. But alongside it was something else, a cold, calculated sense of purpose. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. Lauren had made her choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I understood that I couldn't let this go unaddressed. Lauren had betrayed me, betrayed our family, all for money and status, and I knew I had to strike back where it would hurt her the most. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life and my children's future. I wanted her to feel the pain of losing everything she held dear. Just as I was feeling it right now, I began to formulate my plan, and the first step was to gather resources. It was going to take time, patience, and careful execution. I opened a separate bank account in my name, far from the prying eyes of our shared finances. Every paycheck and every bit of extra money I could scrape together went into that account. It felt exhilarating and terrifying at the same time, knowing that each dollar I saved was a step closer to my freedom. I kept my composure during those months, wearing a mask of normalcy while plotting my exit. In those early stages, I had to be strategic. I started looking for jobs in another city, searching online for opportunities that would allow me to support myself and the kids. I had to choose a place far enough away from our current life, a location that would offer us a fresh start, where the memories of Lauren and Tom wouldn't haunt us. I scoured real estate websites for homes, searching for the perfect neighborhood, somewhere safe, with good schools for the kids, and perhaps a park nearby where we could start anew. Lauren had no idea about my plans. She was consumed by her affair with Tom, and her focus was solely on him. I watched her every day, a mix of anger and sadness swirling inside me as I observed the woman I once loved become someone I barely recognized. She was so engrossed in her new life, so enamored with the idea of wealth and glamour, that she had forgotten the life we built together, the promises we made to each other. I often felt a pang of regret, but I quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't about her anymore, this was about me and the kids. As the months passed, I worked on the details of my plan. I needed to prepare everything meticulously, ensuring that when the time came, I could execute my escape without a hitch. I started gathering important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, and anything that would be necessary for the kids and me to start fresh. I stored them in a secure place, carefully hidden where Lauren would never find them. Every day, I became more resolute in my decision. I pictured the moment I would finally walk away, the look on her face when she realized I had taken the kids and vanished from her life. The idea filled me with a sense of empowerment. I was no longer a victim, I was taking control of my destiny. I envisioned the freedom we would find away from the turmoil of our broken family, how my children would thrive in a new environment, free from the toxicity of Lauren's betrayal. I was also careful not to act out of anger. While revenge was my motivation, I wanted to make sure I didn't let emotions cloud my judgment. I knew I had to remain calm and focused. There were times when the anger boiled beneath the surface, but I channeled it into my planning. I thought of all the nights I spent alone, the weight of betrayal heavy on my heart, and I used that pain to fuel my determination. I found ways to keep my financial activities hidden from Lauren. I started selling items we didn't need, things that had accumulated over the years, old furniture, electronics, and toys the kids had outgrown. Every sale went into my secret account. I devised a story for when she noticed the missing items, claiming we were decluttering for a yard sale or donating to charity. She never questioned it, never suspected that her life was about to unravel. I also began to subtly prepare the kids for the transition. We would have family outings where I would point out different neighborhoods and discuss things they might like about moving, planting the seeds of excitement in their minds. I wanted to ensure they felt a sense of adventure rather than loss when the time came. I didn't want them to associate our move with their mother's betrayal. I wanted them to see it as a new beginning, a chance for us to create a better life together. With each passing day, the weight of my plan lifted my spirits. I felt lighter and more purposeful. I could envision our new life, a place where the children could laugh freely, where I could be a father without the shadow of betrayal looming over me. The thought of that future became my motivation, a bright light guiding me through the darkness of this painful chapter. And so, I kept moving forward, meticulously working toward my goal, determined to make the best choices for my children and myself. I knew that when the time came, I would be ready. The fear of the unknown was overshadowed by the excitement of the new life awaiting us. I had to remind myself that I was doing this for them. I wanted to be the father they deserved, one who could provide them with love, security, and a home free from the heartache that had defined our lives for too long. With every dollar saved and every document prepared, I was closer to the day I would finally break free. Lauren had made her choices, and now it was my turn to make mine. A choice that would not only reclaim my life but also protect my children from the pain of a broken home. The plan was set in motion, and there was no turning back now. One morning, as the sun crept through the curtains, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. Lauren had left for a weekend getaway with her friends, and I knew it was my chance. I had planned this moment down to the last detail, and now it was finally here. I could almost hear my heart pounding in my chest as I gathered the kids. They were still sleeping, blissfully unaware of the monumental change that was about to unfold in their lives. I didn't want them to feel the weight of what was happening. Not just yet. I wanted them to feel safe and loved, even if it meant turning their world upside down. I tiptoed through the house, careful not to make any noise that might wake them. I had packed their favorite toys, clothes, and essentials, everything we would need for our new life. I loaded the car quietly, glancing around the house that had been our home for so long. It felt surreal to think about how quickly everything was changing. Every object I passed reminded me of the life we had built together. The laughter, the tears, and now, the betrayal. But there was no time for nostalgia. I had to stay focused. Once the car was loaded, I returned to the kids' rooms. I knelt beside their beds, watching them sleep peacefully. I brushed my fingers gently over their hair, wishing that they would always be this innocent and carefree. I hated the thought of what they were losing, but I knew this was for the best. They needed to be away from the chaos, away from the lies that had seeped into our lives. With a heavy heart but a clear mind, I whispered a quiet promise: we're going to be okay. As I finished loading the last of our things into the car, I turned to look at our home one final time. It was a bittersweet moment. I felt a pang of sadness for what we were leaving behind, but the exhilaration of the unknown called to me like a siren. I knew that this was the moment I would reclaim my life and my children's futures. With one last look at the house, I closed the door behind me and slipped into the driver's seat. The kids stirred as I started the engine, but they didn't wake. I drove away slowly, ensuring I didn't attract any attention, feeling the weight of my decision settle in my stomach. This was it. There was no turning back now. The road ahead was a blur as we headed toward our new beginning. I had already planned the route, choosing back roads to avoid any potential recognition. I felt a mix of adrenaline and fear, knowing that Lauren would wake up soon and discover my absence. Part of me felt guilty, but I reminded myself that she had made her choices. It was time for me to take control of my life. After driving for a few hours, we reached the new town where we would start our lives anew. I had arranged for us to stay in a modest rental home, a far cry from the life we had known. But it was safe, and it was ours. I parked the car in front of the house, letting out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. As I turned around to look at the kids, their sleepy faces illuminated by the soft morning light, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We were free. Before we entered the house, I pulled out a pen and a piece of paper from my pocket. I wrote a brief note and left it on the kitchen table. It simply read, "Let your neighbor pay the bills now." I knew that this would shock her, and part of me felt a twinge of guilt for the pain it would cause. But I reminded myself that she had chosen this path, and now she would have to live with the consequences. I placed the note on the table and walked out, leaving behind the life I once knew. It didn't take long for Lauren to notice that something was off. I had anticipated her reaction, but nothing could prepare me for the onslaught of emotions that washed over me as I checked my phone later that day. The moment I saw her name flash on the screen, I felt a jolt of anxiety. I had turned off notifications, but her persistent calls began flooding in, one after another, each more frantic than the last. At first, she seemed confused. "Where are you?" she texted. "Is everything okay? Please call me." I felt a pang of remorse, but I steeled myself against it. I couldn't respond. I couldn't let her know that I was still thinking about her. I had to remain resolute and focused on the future and not the past. I didn't want to engage in a back and forth that would only weaken my resolve. Then the tone of her messages shifted. The confusion turned into anger as she began to hurl accusations my way. "You betrayed me," she wrote, her words dripping with disdain. "How could you do this? You don't have the right to take the kids away from me." Her accusations pierced through my heart like daggers, but I refused to let them reach my core. I was doing this for us, for the kids, and for my sanity. I wasn't the villain in this story, she had written her script. The texts came faster now, escalating in intensity. "You think you can just run away with them? You'll pay for this. I swear I'll make your life hell." I could picture her pacing around the house, her face flushed with anger and betrayal. I imagined her desperately trying to contact anyone who would listen, seeking support from friends or family. But this time, she had no control over the situation, and that realization felt strangely empowering. I remained silent, allowing her to stew in her anger. I knew that every attempt she made to regain control would only further solidify my resolve. Her anger fueled my determination. This wasn't just about escaping her, it was about finally taking charge of my life. About providing my children with a chance at happiness away from the toxicity that had enveloped our home. Days passed, and Lauren's messages became increasingly desperate. "I'm sorry for everything," she wrote. "Please just come back. We can fix this." The guilt gnawed at me, and I hesitated for a moment. I thought of the good times we had shared, the love that had once flourished between us. But then I remembered the betrayal, the lies, and the heartache. Those memories grounded me, reminding me why I had made this decision in the first place. Eventually, she resorted to threats. "I'll take you to court. You'll regret this. You can't just disappear." Each message echoed with desperation, but I had already made my choice. I couldn't allow her to manipulate me any longer. I knew she would eventually figure out where we had gone, and I steeled myself for the confrontation that lay ahead. As the days turned into weeks, I settled into our new routine with the kids, each day reinforcing my belief that I had made the right decision. I focused on creating a warm, nurturing environment, one filled with laughter and love. I wanted to protect them from the storm that was brewing on the other side of the country, and I hoped they would one day understand why I had to make such a drastic choice. But now and then, as I tucked them into bed or watched them play, I felt a flicker of doubt. Would I be able to handle the fallout? Would I be strong enough to withstand Lauren's wrath? Yet, as I watched them drift off to sleep, I knew I would do whatever it took to shield them from the chaos of our past. I was determined to forge a new path for us, one that was free from the shadows of betrayal and heartbreak. And so, I pressed forward, knowing that I had chosen this path for a reason. I could no longer be a pawn in someone else's game. I would be the architect of my future, even if it meant weathering the storm that Lauren had unleashed. It was a new beginning, one filled with uncertainty, but it was also one filled with hope. And for the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. Settling into our new city felt like stepping into a new world. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking, adjusting to new routines, and finding our footing in unfamiliar surroundings. I had managed to secure a job at a local marketing firm, and it was refreshing to dive into work where I could channel my energy into something productive and fulfilling. The stress and anxiety that had once consumed me slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The kids were my priority, of course. Enrolling them in a new school was a daunting task, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The school was warm and welcoming, and I watched in delight as they made new friends and started to blossom in this fresh environment. I could see them laughing and playing on the playground, their eyes bright with excitement as they talked about their new teachers and the activities they were involved in. I cherished these moments, grateful that we had escaped the turmoil of our past lives. Each morning, as I drove them to school, I would marvel at how quickly they adapted. They no longer carried the weight of the secrets and lies that had haunted our old home. Their laughter echoed in the car, filling it with a warmth that made my heart swell with joy. I felt lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. Gone were the sleepless nights spent worrying about Lauren's affair. In its place was a newfound clarity and peace. Work provided me with an opportunity to meet new people and forge connections that weren't clouded by past relationships. My colleagues were friendly and supportive, and I found myself engaging in conversations that felt refreshing and invigorating. I was no longer a man defined by betrayal, I was becoming my person again, reclaiming my identity, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope for the future. Every Sunday, we would explore our new city together, seeking out parks, museums, and community events. I cherished these family outings, knowing they were essential in helping us bond and heal. One sunny afternoon, we stumbled upon a local fair with rides, games, and food stalls. I watched as the kids squealed with delight, their faces painted with joy as they ran from one attraction to the next. In those moments, I knew I had made the right decision. We were creating new memories, building a life that was no longer defined by betrayal and heartbreak. While I found solace in our new life, I couldn't completely forget about Lauren. I learned from mutual acquaintances that she was struggling. The whispers and murmurs that reached my ears painted a vivid picture of her downfall. The once vibrant and bustling home we had shared was now a hollow shell of what it used to be. The laughter of children that once filled those walls had been replaced with silence, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the woman I had once loved. Despite everything that had transpired between us. From what I gathered, Lauren had tried to rekindle her relationship with Tom after I left, hoping to find some semblance of happiness. But it seemed that her attempts fell flat. Tom, upon realizing the weight of the situation, had pulled away from her, no longer willing to be the escape she sought. I could only imagine how difficult it must have been for her, the realization that she had sacrificed everything for a fleeting affair. Only to end up alone. I heard stories from mutual friends about her desperate attempts to reconnect with me, reaching out to anyone who would listen, trying to understand what went wrong. It was as if she was clinging to the last remnants of a life she had thrown away. She would post on social media about how everyone makes mistakes, seeking validation and sympathy, but the likes and comments she received were mostly sympathetic but distant. It was a far cry from the adoration she once enjoyed when we were still together. As the days turned into weeks, I learned that she was not only struggling emotionally but also financially. The divorce had taken a toll on her, and her attempts to reclaim her old lifestyle were met with barriers at every turn. I could see her pride slowly eroding as she navigated the harsh reality of being a single mother without the support system she once had. The lavish dinners and high society gatherings she used to enjoy became distant memories, replaced by the stress of juggling bills and the emptiness of a home devoid of laughter. Her house, once filled with warmth and joy, now stood cold and desolate. The pictures of our happy family were taken down, replaced with muted tones and minimalist decor that screamed of a woman trying to forget her past. I imagined her standing in the middle of that empty living room, staring at the walls that had witnessed our love, our fights, and our family gatherings, realizing that she had lost it all. As the seasons changed, I would occasionally catch glimpses of her at community events. Her face a mask of forced composure. She would put on a brave front, but I could see the pain in her eyes. The spark that once illuminated her presence was now dulled by the weight of her choices. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and even a touch of pity. The woman I once adored was a shadow of her former self, and I couldn't help but feel the burden of that loss. Lauren's friends reached out to me sometimes, expressing their concern for her well-being. They would tell me how she would often talk about wanting to fix things. How she regretted her decisions and missed the life we had built together. I would listen, but I never engaged with their attempts to rekindle any kind of connection. I knew better than to step back into that web of manipulation and chaos. I focused on my new life, finding solace in the routine I had built with the kids. Our days were filled with love and laughter, and while Lauren's struggles weighed on my mind, I knew I had to protect my children from the fallout of her choices. They deserved happiness, stability, and a family that thrived together, and I was determined to provide that for them. Ultimately, I hoped Lauren would find her way, but it was clear that our paths had diverged too far. I had emerged from the shadows of her betrayal, and now it was time for her to confront the consequences of her actions. I could only wish her well from a distance, knowing that my priority was to create a nurturing environment for my children, away from the ghosts of our past. Life without Lauren was not just easier. It was liberating, and I would continue to build a future where love, happiness, and security thrived. Now, as I look back on everything that has happened, I realize that my quest for vengeance was painful but necessary. Lauren made her choice, and I made mine. A choice to reclaim my life and protect my children from the chaos she had brought into our home. Our new life is tranquil and stable. The laughter of my kids fills our home, and I have learned to appreciate the small moments of joy that come with parenting. I no longer see myself as a victim of her betrayal. Instead, I am a survivor who has emerged stronger from the turmoil. This new chapter is about healing and growth. I've embraced my role as a father and as an individual who deserves happiness. The pain of the past has shaped me, but it no longer defines me. I am forging a future filled with love, laughter, and security, and I am determined to create a life where my children can thrive, free from the shadows of betrayal. In this new beginning, I have found peace and purpose, and I am ready to embrace whatever comes next.